Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And this week, today in fact, Liz Truss is publishing her book, 10 Years to Save the West, which, despite how cringe I think the title is, I would imagine is actually quite a good book with quite a few good ideas, given what Liz Truss has said while she was in power for 40 days, what she was saying on her Tory leadership campaign trail, and what she has been saying since, and even going on a panel with Steve Bannon and putting forward her ideas of what's wrong with British government, what's wrong with the West in general, and effectively how do we solve all this. And since she actually wants to sell some of her books, which by the way I have no plans to buy, so sorry about that, Liz, she has been on a quite a large interview trail for the past week or so. And yesterday she was on GB News being interviewed by Nigel Farage, and I gave it a bit of a watch, and decided actually some of it's worth talking about. And so with that, we are going to get right into this because I know how long I take with these things. So, please take it away, Liz Truss.
Well, the only Conservative in the room refers to the position of the UK in the global firmament.
Truss here means specifically when she was in government.
And what I faced was Emmanuel Macron in France, Olaf Scholz in Germany, Biden in the US, Trudeau in Canada. And the fact is that the free world has been largely run by the left, with the exception of the UK. I was the only Conservative in the room for many years.
This is one of the big problems with Liz Truss. She isn't very charismatic, which is why I feel like I have to butt in quite a few times and rephrase what she is saying. Because again, she is specifically meaning when she was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. She felt like she was the only Conservative in the room, and I wouldn't be shocked, given all the news that comes out about France, Germany, the United States, and especially Canada. Having said that, France seems to be doing quite a lot better with its Islamist problem these days. However, the country does run into massive riots whenever it tries to do anything sensible with its pension scheme or with its workers' rights or anything like that. And absolutely none of these countries seem to be trying to push against things that people would say is the WEF's agenda. They all seem to want their European farmers to effectively be put out of a job and not farm anymore. The US and Canada I'm not so sure on, however, they appear to be further than us, especially in their big liberal cities, in terms of wokeness. Or to put that another way, enforcing intersectional ideology. And so yes, I can understand Liz Truss, who was quite clearly a bit of a spanner in the works for this sort of thing, to be seen as or to see herself especially as the only Conservative in the room, because she was the only one who was actually openly against most of that stuff. Hence, I feel it was right that the Tory members actually voted her in. It's just a shame that the MPs decided that no, she wasn't our choice, she needs to go.
And it's not working. You know, the West is weak. We're seeing authoritarian regimes on the rise. And what we're also seeing is in our own societies, our very values being undermined.
And this is why I'll always have a lot of respect for Liz Truss. She actually understands what the problems are. And this might be why it's worth actually getting her book in the end. I don't know, I might actually be convinced after making this video to buy it and give it a read. I mean, I've nearly finished The Hobbit, so I suppose adding one more book to the prioritised reading list wouldn't hurt, but it would be very interesting to get a perspective from someone who has actually been on the inside, who is at the very least just not openly left-wing, doesn't say the proudest moment of Conservative history was when we allowed the gays to marry. I'd like a Prime Minister that doesn't just throw out random virtue signalling left-wing, leftist or liberal, whatever talking points to try and score good brownie points for leftists that are never going to like him. And yes, I do obviously mean Rishi Sunak here, who the only thing that he's really done that is anti-leftist, for lack of a better term, is going against net zero by actually allowing exploratory North Sea oil licenses to be approved, and I guess he manages to say that women have vaginas. You know, well done. But here Liz Truss seems to be taking it a step further and saying, actually, no, we have a massive political cartel of leftist orthodoxy, and being the only Conservative in the room is a bit weird, so carry on, Liz Truss.
You know, the things we believe in, our nation, the family, individual freedom, all of those core values are being undermined, and that is what my book is about.
Okay, I suppose that's one thing in the pro category for buying this book. I would like an insider's perspective in Parliament and, well, the rest of the geopolitical sphere about how these things can be saved. Like, genuinely, Liz Truss's perspective is quite useful for all of us. You know, she's seen the whole inner workings of Parliament and Number 10. And as I'm sure she'll go into, it's basically impossible for MPs and PMs to actually do anything without the approval of the civil service. But Farage now asks her, is the Tory party actually conservative?
Well, I'd like them to be more conservative. They're definitely more conservative than the Labour Party, which are desperate to kowtow to the global left.
It's worth bearing in mind here that Liz Truss is still a Tory MP, and being an MP representing the Tory party, she can't exactly badmouth them as freely as she'd probably like to here. So light criticism of I'd like them to be more conservative effectively means, yes, they are not conservative, Mr. Farage. And then she goes on the attack on Labour, but we know Labour are overtly left-wing, so we can just skip all this and get something interesting.
But I would like to see the Conservative Party taking a stronger stance, and in particular, being prepared to change the system, because what I found that too often, much of the power that was meant to lie in our hands actually lay with unelected bureaucrats.
Yeah, this is something that I've said for a while, and is part of the reason I'm actually quite sympathetic to a lot of Tory MPs, especially those in the Home Office, because a common right-wing complaint is that, oh, these are just leftists in right-wing skin suits, they don't really want to do anything about it, and I don't buy that. I think Suella Braverman wanted to solve the illegal immigrant problem. I think Priti Patel wanted to deport a hell of a lot more foreign criminals, but every time something was done about it, all Britain could actually do was just send money abroad to get absolutely nothing in return. We should have been sending tens of thousands of people to Rwanda by this point, but none of it can be done because of unelected bureaucrats, because of foreign courts, because, effectively, of the groundwork Tony Blair laid. And as I say, Liz Truss, if she keeps pointing this out, hell, I'll buy your book and take you seriously on that, because you might not be particularly good at public speaking, but you've got the right ideas, and I hope your writing's better than your speaking. So Nigel Farage goes into quite a long setup for his next question, saying that clearly Tory MPs are very left-wing, but it appears that the membership are very right-wing, at least in terms of, you know, specifically within the broad church of the Tory party, and asks, why is there such a difference between the membership and the MPs that all of them elect in?
I mean, you talked about things like net zero, you talked about immigration, but let's remember where those policies started. It was the Labour government under Blair that put in place the Climate Change Act.
Yep.
And this is something that my dad says all the time, because his pet policy hate is the price cap on energy. He absolutely hates that the government is the one in charge of all energy companies' prices. And in fact, when that came in, we had something like 70 energy companies, according to Ofgem, and now there are 22. Literally, thanks to the energy price cap, 48 companies went bust. Partially because of the energy price cap, and partially because of rising wholesale energy prices. And obviously, because of the price cap, they couldn't make a profit and so had to go bust. Being an energy company is stupid in the modern day, unless you happen to be one of the big energy suppliers. And I would not be surprised if they were pushing for the market price cap, because then they are the only players in the region and make billions. But then, having said that, there's loads of people who say, oh, they're making billions, isn't that awful? They're making money off keeping us warm. To which I say no, because that's still like a 2 to 3% profit margin, which is absolutely nothing. You know, they make about £8 profit per person per month. They are not gouging us dry. They're not allowed to. The government won't allow it. But anyway, this is off topic. Energy companies now, we have 22 of them, used to have 70, and it was due to the price cap being introduced in 2019, which Theresa May started putting the works in when she was in power. Guess whose idea it was? Ed Miliband. And the thing is, my brother always says, I don't see how it being a Labour idea is in any way indicative of being Labour's fault. And, well, this is the thing. That I have to explain to him, the point isn't that it's Labour's fault. The point is that the Tories are just Labour in an awful lot of ways. and this is what people are getting fed up of. We've effectively had New Labour since 1997, when Tony Blair got in. And so this whole 14 years of Tory rule, I mean, it's true in a very technical sense, and that's about it. In a philosophical and governmental sense, we have literally had New Labour policies being introduced pretty much every year. It's not a Conservative policy to ban the petrol and diesel car in 2035. Every now and then, people like me will get some red meat, like, oh, look, we're going to extract more from the North Sea. Like, great, but, we're basically starving lions at this point. And people are so just disillusioned with Britain at this point that we'll take anything. Even Reform, who have a less charismatic leader than Liz Truss somehow, and are managing to just annoy the entire online right wing, are probably going to end up being quite a large political force in the coming years, simply due to the fact that everyone is fed up with the Tories being Labour.
Also, the Constitutional Reform Act, which Blair put in 2005, which created the Supreme Court, which we never had before in Britain, which is now challenging government policy.
This is another reason I can't help but respect Liz Truss. She is actually pointing out all the issues that me, the Wellington Project, hell, pretty much everyone in the online right has been pointing out for years, that basically Blair is the core of all this, and pretty much all the reforms that he put into place during his prime ministership were effectively revolutionary, and not in the good way. It can probably be called the Americanization of Britain, having Tony Blair in charge, and when it's the Americanization, it isn't good old 1776 reforms. It's more like FDR, put the state in charge of everything and make sure any successive government can't do anything to change the welfare state, to get rid of immigrants. Effectively we need infinity migrants absolutely all the time, and you need to block anything trying to go against that. And that's pretty much what every Tony Blair institution is doing. And Liz Truss pointing that out is very good. That is a very good first step, if nothing else. This is why I think the Clown Decade's going to end with us effectively starting on the road to winning, because we're already seeing the first steps.
So I would say what we have got wrong over the last 14 years is we didn't take on that Blair consensus. It's also meant that a lot of decisions that should be taken by ministers are effectively being taken by the courts. They're being taken by unelected bureaucrats. So,
as I say, great stuff, and I hope she actually starts going a bit into her solutions in this interview. Because I'm not being funny, if she says something that is quite convincingly a good starting point, I'm probably going to buy her book, because she probably has good ideas. If she is... Because a lot of problems I'm seeing, especially on the online right, is that they're very good at pointing out problems, but they never really have solutions, and if they do have solutions, they're mental. But someone like Liz Truss, I think, will have realistic solutions, given that she's been in the realistic situation of actually being able to change something. However, she's realised that the route to power now isn't through Parliament. She appears to understand that now, but I actually need that confirmed before I can actually read the book and say, oh, she does have good ideas on how actually to save the West. Let's actually try and implement them. But I need to see actual evidence of her having good solutions here.
I would argue the problems started earlier on when people said, Tony Blair is the master, I'm the heir to Blair. That was where the problems started. And now, 14 years later, we didn't do enough to turn that round.
Yeah, I think she's absolutely right yet again. The issue with the past 14 years has been that pretty much every Tory Prime Minister has been trying to emulate Blair, because the problem is that the Tory party, all they try and do is win elections. That's all they're interested in. And so the thing is that when it comes to winning elections, you have to find what actually the electable position is. And unfortunately, Liz Truss is not it. She is definitely unpopular. I think partially because of her charisma. I don't think it's down to her ideas, because I think a lot of her ideas are genuinely popular, especially outside of major metropolitan cities. However, this is the problem. Pretty much all Tory MPs and everyone in CCHQ will only be surrounded by metropolitan liberal city folk. And so this is the whole of Matt Goodwin's argument in his book about the new elites. Effectively, they are all trying to seem like good people, and from the Tory party perspective, that is to try and win votes. Or people like, effectively they are convinced that wokeness sells, for a lack of a better term, despite the fact they're trying quite quickly, and both parties are doing this, to get away from that, because they've only recently realised it. The problem is that at the moment, it's all just talk. It's all entirely just talk. I mean, sure, the Cass review came out recently, and trans radical activists are going nuts over it, and both sides have realised that the trans radical activists are deeply unpopular. However, again, that is an open goal for absolutely everyone, and they can see that, but they're blinded to the other open goals because the new elite have lost the trans argument, quite frankly, but they're still winning all the others. But hey, it might be that meme of death knocking on the door. Like, sure, the right wing have won on the trans debate, great, but we've got years to go on the immigration debate, and even that's falling apart at the moment. Basically, everyone accepts at this point that immigration isn't this great boost to the economy like we've always been told. How can we tell? GDP per capita has been completely stagnant for 2 decades. And everyone is noticing that standards in Britain are dropping. Not necessarily that every drop in standard is related to immigration, but people are noticing the standards that are dropping that are related to it. So the more that gets into the mainstream, the more likely that the Tory party are going to use it as a winning strategy to get elected. Whether they then do anything about it, well, that is unknown. At the moment, no one has any trust that they will. And Liz Truss might be right. It might be mainly because they can't actually do anything about it because of the civil service, because of the Supreme Court, etc., etc. So you need a revolutionary Tony Blair figure that is actually right-wing. That's what we need. A counter Tony Blair.
But the argument the other lot are worse isn't very powerful, is it?
Well, this is why I believe we need to acknowledge what the problems are and actually say how we're going to deal with them.
So Farage points this out after she goes on for about 2 minutes about Keir Starmer doubling down on Blairite reforms and actually outsourcing more power from Parliament. And she's not wrong. I think that's absolutely right. That's why I think it's actually a really bad idea to say 0 seats for the Tories, 500 seats for Labour. Because, man, you think we've got a Blair forever party at the moment? No, we're nowhere near that, sunshine. Nowhere near it. I suppose, to give a bit of a white pull there, the accelerationism on the Blairite side might be so great that effectively people just start ignoring authority at that point because it just gets so ridiculous. I know it's already happening in small companies. I know small companies have to make a pledge to net zero, but they all say, what the hell are we supposed to do? But, I mean, the thing is, do we want to take that risk? I don't know. The problem is, as well, which party's better? Reform might be better, but I think Reform are going to go too far in the... Man, the problem with the House of Lords is the Blairite reforms. Let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater and basically give the left what they want, which is PR, another elected house, effectively just bastardise Britain's institutions even more. I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea. I like their tax cuts and welfare reforms, fine. But in the long term, when it comes to our political institutions, I'd rather they actually put them back into a more, forward-facing, long-term thinking institution, rather than what it is now, which is people that not both parties, all parties can just get members into to try and cause havoc, rather than it be full of hereditary peers, who are actually people who will be thinking far into the future because, their families are going to want to carry on the legacy and stay in Britain. Whereas being elected every 5 years, that gives you a lot of short-termism. So you need the long term with the short term. That's what made it quite good. But however, these days it's all just short-termism, which again is what Liz Truss points out. So anyway, she's gone on enough about the issues that we face today. I'd like to start hearing some solutions. But for now, Farage asks about Liz Truss's political journey, because she started off in quite a left-wing household and then went to be a Liberal Democrat at university and then became a Conservative MP to then become Conservative leader and PM, and is now over in America at the Heritage Foundation making rather right-wing talks. So he's interested in what her political journey was. And to be honest, I'm interested in it too, because there's a big question a lot of friends and family have between me and my brother, because he's rather left-wing and I'm obviously rather right-wing. And they're kind of wondering why such a difference came about. And I think university is quite formative in political thinking, and not always in the best way. Of course, it was in the best way for me because I saw the insanity and hated it, but I don't think it was as bad 10 years ago in my brother's day. Well, it was 20 years ago for my brother, so...
I think I have to some extent, and I think people say that Conservatives are libertarians who have daughters, and I've got 2 daughters, and that's definitely made me more conservative.
And this is another thing, and Sargon's actually pointed this out quite a while ago, because Carl's obviously got 4 kids now, I think. But it does seem to be that having children naturally makes a lot of people more conservative. But I think it's actually a bit more concise than that. I don't think it's just having kids makes you more conservative, because I'm not going to lie, not an awful lot of single mothers seem to be particularly right-wing. However, I think it's actually having a stable family unit makes you more right-wing. Because of course it does. At the moment, right-wing means more individualistic. And that doesn't mean actually on an literal atomised individual level. That means on a family level most of the time to a lot of people. It means associating with who you want to, deciding actually the parents do know what's best for the child, and going forward in that direction. Whereas a lot of single mothers, for example, do tend to rely on the state for an awful lot of things, and so of course they go more left-wing, because whether it's because they want the child support money from the government, whether it's because they want to offload the child to school so that they have time to, either work or do the housework or whatever else. It's not as simple as have kids become right-wing or have a house become right-wing. There's a lot more to it than that. However, I do think it is good and actually probably necessary for people in public office to actually have kids and have a family. At the very, depending how old or young they are, if they're like 20, it's understandable why they don't have kids. However, if in your 60s and have been childless all your life, then yeah, maybe you're not very good at looking in the long term, because from what I can understand and what I see, having kids completely changes your perspective on life. And I mean, I suppose this is how I know I'm not on the autistic spectrum, because I can actually empathise with that viewpoint of life.
My parents are more left-wing than me. Their assumption that the USSR was effectively moral equivalent to the US and we should all give up our weapons, I realised maybe that wasn't the right thing, and I looked at what Thatcher and Reagan was doing and thought, yeah.
There really should be studies on this sort of thing, because a lot of people do get the idea in their head that, the kids are naturally rebellious, they always want to rebel against the older generation. And I think that's really only a late 20th century thing. I think that's really only been true from like the 60s onwards. Because when I've been reading, older novels and things like that, you don't really hear about kids being rebellious or anything like that. I mean, I suppose you get the odd one, but it's usually an individual problem child that's more rebellious, and most of the kids just want to get on with life. But the reason I bring this up is because an awful lot of parents these days, bringing up Generation Alpha, they're young Gen X, older millennial types. They're the typical left-wingers of today. And yet, the younger people who are being brought up now, I mean, I know a lot of people are saying, I've got a lot of faith in Gen Z, they're the most right-wing ever. I mean, in Britain, at least, that's not actually true. I know there's been studies in the US and the rest of Europe that actually, especially men or boys, they're going way more conservative than the girls who are going way more liberal. And in the UK, they're actually closer than anywhere else. The boys aren't actually moving right, they're just kind of plateauing at this point. And, in my mind, given that we've got an awful lot of, 30 to 40-year-olds that are actually very left-wing, the rebellion idea doesn't seem to be fitting, at least at the moment. Give it 5 years, it might kick in, but I'm not convinced, basically, that children are naturally rebellious. I think they're rebellious insofar as they will try and push boundaries, but the left-wing have got rid of all boundaries now, and so what are they trying to push against now? And I suppose that could be what it is. Maybe a lot of kids are moving more towards, saying the N-word in online games, calling other people F-slurs, because they're way more a social taboo now than they were in the 90s. But, from when I play online, like Call of Duty these days, it's nowhere near the level it was in Modern Warfare 2 days of whenever it came out, 2006 or whatever. However, I do find it interesting that Liz Truss did effectively rebel against her parents, and honestly, I think having someone who is rebellious against left-wing parents is the type of person we need in some sort of position of power. I would not have her as a public-facing politician, though. I'd probably try and keep her on a less public part of the cabinet. I'm sorry, Liz, but you're really just not charismatic enough for the roles.
I've always believed in freedom, and I've always railed against what I would describe as the liberal establishment.
I don't know about always. She was a Liberal Democrat in university, but then joined the Tory party straight after, so assuming she counts university as part of her formative years, I suppose she can get away with saying that she's always been against the Liberal establishment, but you got to bear in mind, she campaigned for the abolition of the monarchy and the legalisation of cannabis while at university, but seems to have really fallen back on that. So I guess you can say that after her formative years, yes, she has railed against the liberal movements.
So at the school, I went to comprehensive school in Leeds, and I was frustrated that we were being given lessons on anti-sexism and anti-racism rather than making sure that all the children in the class could actually read and write properly.
I mean, that is actually a huge issue these days. More and more reports are coming out that basically kids these days are just almost maladjusted in their education. Many by 11 can barely read properly. And I even remember going to university, and the first thing we had to do in the first week was write like a 3-page report in our own handwriting. And that was basically mostly, not really to test our ability to write, well, it was purely our ability to write, I suppose, but not write about geology, so to speak, more so to test that they could actually read our writing and whether we needed extra lessons in how to write with good grammar, punctuation, and things like that. So already for my generation, which was slightly above today's standards, even then universities were realising, oh, we actually need to teach kids the basics here, which is honestly quite embarrassing for the school system. But even then, for Liz Truss to say back in the 80s, even then there were lessons on how not to be sexist and things like that. You know, things that really shouldn't be down to the school were being taught. Yeah, I can understand her issue with that. I always found relationship lessons in school to be quite cringe and really not helpful. But I didn't realise they were still going on in the 80s, so my God, the problem runs deep.
And there was a sort of patronising attitude that emanated from some of the teachers, that sort of frustrated me. And
if nothing else, this lack of charisma really does make Liz Truss seem like, you know, a normal human being. And I was quite lucky, obviously, I mention it a lot, but I went to private school and I didn't really have the issue of annoying left-wing teachers there, really. If anything, the opposite was true. We had quite conservative teachers, especially in the religious department, and even in the economics department. I think if I didn't do economics, I wouldn't have the outlook I have on it today. Because that's where the seeds of maybe the NHS needs some private intervention came into my mind. I still remember the first economics lesson we had. The economics teacher's main lesson was, look, you get people to pay a £5 just to see a GP, you will see NHS waiting times just plummet. Because just that £5 gives people the incentive to just think, do I actually need to see a doctor for this cold or not? And obviously the girls in the class started saying, oh, but what about people that can't afford a £5? And I found this amazing at the time, because I just never even heard this attitude before. But yeah, the teacher just said, well, tough on them. And that's when I started thinking, you can actually just say no to people. And I suppose this is the thing with the Monday politics. You can't say no to people asking for Gibbs. And really, a lot of the time, I think we need to. Some people obviously do need some help if it comes to a big disability or something like that. But no, for a lot of people, they should be able to manage by themselves, but don't. Anyway, Truss goes on to explain how she joined the Liberal Democrats because a Lib Dem candidate gave a speech to school and she got interested in politics via that route. And being from North Leeds, it was basically impossible to actually meet any open Conservatives and to, well, effectively become one. So that's actually her route into the Liberal Democrats, which is quite understandable because my route into politics was early Sargon videos, effectively, because I really didn't care before that. I only really cared post-Brexit. And early Sargon was effectively a social libertarian while effectively wanting new Labour economic policies. He's moved all around the place now, and I've more or less followed him while being much more based on economics. But I have no problem with this then. If she literally just became a Liberal Democrat for 2 or 3 years at university to then keep an open mind and then eventually join the Tories. I mean, I do mean this. Liz Truss might be the realest person in politics. And this is why I have so much time for her. I mean, being thrown into the prime ministership and then basically having the entire establishment against you, how is any normal person supposed to deal with that? And the fact Liz Truss is just striking back against all this, you got to have respect for it.
So it was only when I went to Oxford University, I met Conservatives. I thought these people don't have two heads. And I joined the Hayek Society. That was my gateway drug to the Conservative Party.
I mean, this just goes to show how far social contagion can actually go. And this is a massive issue with the North at the moment. This is why it was so amazing that so many northern towns went Conservative under Boris Johnson. It is because, and there's a shy Tory effect, of course, that was part of the reason they got elected in. But this is true. A lot of young kids just absolutely hate the Tories in the North, and they can't really give you an accurate description as to why. There's a reason an awful lot of people in the North love Angela Rayner, and it's because they think she's good because she just rails on the Tories like everything else they've heard in life. But as we can see, Liz Truss had an open mind and was clearly a fan of free market economics from an earlier age than most of us are, I'd say. And so obviously had this frankly bigoted assertion that, yeah, Tories don't know what they're talking about, they're just idiots, blah, blah, blah. And then joined a free market society in the university, and then from there obviously realised, oh, Margaret Thatcher was actually right then. And obviously she was saying earlier that in the 80s she thought Reagan and Thatcher had the right idea when it came to how to deal with the USSR, but this has happened to me as well. You will go through, you know, your teen years thinking one thing. I mean, in Liz Truss's case, it's the right wing and Thatcher might be correct on a lot of things. With me, it was probably to do with how quite Catholic I was, because that definitely went away in uni. And I imagine the same thing happened to Liz Truss. She got into politics via a Lib Dem speech, and so joined the Lib Dems. And, you know, I go to uni, become a bit more agnostic, maybe slightly atheistic as well. But then post-uni you realise, oh, I was basically only doing that effectively to try and look clever to other people. I think that's the main thing I can put at least my experience down to. And now obviously post it you realise, oh, I don't really care what other people think. All that matters is what I believe and what I think is best for myself and everyone else. And that's effectively what Liz Truss has done as well. Because I wouldn't say I was very apolitical up until I was about 20. And only since 20, it's the past 8 years where I've become a political junkie more than anything, and I want to learn as much as I can. And I believe in my case, and probably in Liz Truss's case too, it is really just to improve Britain's standing and improve the British people's standing in life. I think that's all where it comes from, but obviously you say, I want to take away an awful lot of Gibbs, and people think, oh, well, you clearly hate the Brits and want them to starve and be poor, and it's just a straw man, and trying to get through to people's heads that there's different ways to actually help people other than just give them free money is very difficult, but it does come from a good place. So as I say, this is why I have a lot of respect for Liz Truss, because frankly, I can see myself being in her position later in life, assuming I do go public in terms of politics. I'm going to have to delete so much stuff from the internet if I do that. Anyway, I'm skipping to an interesting part. Let's hear what Liz Truss has to say about her idea of the deep state.
So there's two elements. There's a quangocracy, but there's also the civil service itself.
Yeah.
And we are still operating under the sort of Northcote Trevelyan civil service, the idea of impartiality. Yet, Sue Gray, senior civil servant, is now Chief of Staff for the Labour Party.
Yep.
We've had a whole bunch of Foreign Office civil servants last week saying ministers have too much power. There should be more power for the Foreign Office bureaucracy.
You get the idea. Once again, this is Liz Truss basically putting forward all the talking points that I've been putting forward for some years now. Yes, the faceless civil service has way too much power and way too much influence over the sovereignty of Parliament. Parliament is the one who is in theory, puts forward the laws, scrutinises them to the point where they can be passed for royal assent, and once that has happened, they have become law. But the problem is now is that the laws are so meaningless that we are effectively in Parliament putting through constantly laws that are just reaffirming other laws. Because reaffirming another law is basically all Parliament can do at this point. That is how little power they have. The police are clearly not applying the law fairly to everyone. The Rwanda plan, for example, clearly can't go ahead because of, as Liz Truss is going to say, the deep state's basically absolute love and addiction to effectively preferring non-British people. And ultimately, because it is the civil service that implements everything, they can basically implement what they want. I mean, I only found out the other day, and the Twitter post has been deleted so I can't show you, but there is literally an option after you pass your citizenship test to refuse to shake hands of a woman for when you get your citizenship, paperwork or whatever, because they shake your hand and say, well done, you're now a citizen of this country. But you can literally say in advance, I refuse this. Which, I'm not being funny, in the UK, if you are becoming a citizen, you should absolutely be able to do that basic social norm. And if you can't, you can't become a citizen. When your visa runs out, goodbye, get deported, go to Rwanda or somewhere else, I don't care. If you can't do the basics of shaking a woman's hand, you don't deserve to be here. And this was not put forward by the Conservatives, by the way. This was not a Conservative idea. There's no way it was. The Conservatives do have a lot of leftists in there. There is no way they would have approved this. This is just something that gets lost in the bureaucracy. This will have been put forward by a private secretary in the civil service saying, look, we're having a lot of issues where, women civil servants go to give the citizenship diploma or whatever it is and go to shake a hand, and all these people are saying, no, I can't. So let's just make it easier for them and give them the option there. And in reality, in the ideal world, they simply would not be given the citizenship because they haven't earned it. They can't do a basic British thing of shaking a hand.
I think this idea of a civil service which doesn't have a worldview is past its sell-by date.
Yeah.
And this is an issue we really have to address if we want to deliver real change and conservative change in the country.
See, Liz Truss, she might clarify, but I don't know if she means a public-facing side of the civil services. They don't have a worldview, when actually in the inner workings, she's quite clearly saying before she says that they do have a worldview, and it's effectively just pure Blairite. And that's why we've had nothing but Blairism for the past 14 years, because you've had a Tory party that is effectively Blairite in nature, but does have conservative principles that it did want to put forward. But obviously, so the Blairite stuff can easily get through the civil service, but everything else can't. That's why illegal immigration is such a big issue, because you listen to Question Time and things like that, everyone's effectively got a Blairite view on it. Oh, people crossing the channel, they're not going to make a dangerous crossing like that unless they really need help, are they? They must be desperate, when in reality, no. They've been promised a life of millionaires, effectively, by becoming drug dealers. I mean, there's a reason that England and Wales is the number 2 consumer of cocaine in the world, just past Albania. It's because Albanians are coming over and selling the drugs. And honestly, it honestly always surprises me when I find out just how many people do cocaine in this country. There are so many. It kind of makes sense why we have such a big club scene, because I've kind of come to realise that I absolutely hate clubbing. And I've kind of realised that the only reason for that is because I never did cocaine. In short, people who love clubbing regularly do cocaine, because it's the only way to enjoy it from what I can tell. But anyway, point being, yes, the public face of the civil service is supposed to be that they are impartial. In reality, they're not. I know this through civil servants I know myself, and through the fact that they keep leaking that they're not neutral. As she says, Sue Gray basically got Boris Johnson kicked out of Parliament. Now she's working as a higher up in the Labour Party. Clearly, there is something wrong going on here. Anyway, we're now moving on to what Liz Truss thought of her own mini-budget, which I don't think I've ever done a proper video on, but if you listen to the other side of the hill, you will know that I basically don't think there was anything wrong in the tax cut in the budget, apart from one big thing, which was the non-means tested energy bill surplus. So basically everyone in Britain will get a bit of help with their energy bill. That was the only thing that stuck, by the way, and it stayed non-means tested. And that was the only thing that was actually wrong with the budget, because effectively, millionaires heating their horses' stables would get some of this subsidy, which is obviously crazy, but because it was free Gibbs, every politician wanted it because, they'll vote for them now. But that's never really talked about. It's all about the unfunded tax cuts and things like that. And here's what Liz Truss has to say about that.
Well, this idea of an unfunded tax cut is a left-wing idea. Nobody ever talks about unfunded spending.
I mean, that's not quite true. That's quite a common attack on Labour. It's how are you going to pay for all this? There's no magic money tree. But it is true that whenever there is a tax cut, it's always, oh, well, how are we going to pay for that? When in reality, it's people are going to get to keep more of their own hard-earned money. And that's a good thing because then they will spend it on things that they deem that they need or want, which is a lot better than having the government say, well, we're going to subsidise X, Y and Z for these people instead, which they won't necessarily want. There is an argument that public spending should be spent on things that the private sector can't justify spending because either the returns are too far away in terms of time or things like that. Things like, nuclear energy or even the bridge from Scotland to Ireland require a massive upfront cost where you will only start seeing benefits 20-odd years down the line. There's reason to believe that the public sector should be spending on that because the private sector won't, but for God's sake, the private sector paid for massive cathedrals in Spain that take over 100 years to build. Like, the private sector will fill in these gaps. Pretty much the entirety of the Victorian railway system was entirely made up of railway tycoons who were paying for public transport lines to be put down. These things do happen. We're just so far away from that being common thinking that that's what Liz Truss should be focused on. But this is a problem, I think, with her rhetoric. Oh, it's a left-wing idea, right. Don't say it's a left-wing idea, say it is wrong. You can have left-wing ideas that are correct, as you can have right-wing ideas that are correct. If you just say this is leftist or this is right-wing, you're not going far enough. And don't get me wrong, I say things like, oh, wokeness is leftist or whatever. But I'll always go into detail as to why it's wrong. I won't just leave it at it's leftist.
The biggest change in the mini budget was not raising corporation tax. So it wasn't actually a tax cut.
No.
It was cancelling a tax rise. And I thought it was madness putting up corporation tax just as the country was emerging from COVID.
Yeah, I mean, even going through the 2008 crash, the Labour weren't even mad enough to try and raise corporation tax. I mean, as you can see here, okay, the small companies rate went from 20 to 21%, but the main rate went down from 30% to 28%. And that continued to fall as time went on. And that's because even New Labour understood that as you are coming into a recession or out of a recession, whatever, if you're around a recession, don't raise corporation tax because you need your economy to grow. And forcing companies to pay extra just to run as a company is not a very attractive prospect. Ireland's economy has managed to grow by basically becoming a tax haven. It does fudge the numbers a bit and it doesn't solve every problem. Nobody's saying that, but it does improve your economy. There's no doubt about that. And yes, that was the thing. There was, one or two actual tax cuts, 1p less in income tax. Obviously, the 45% rate's just being cut for the top earners because that brings in basically no money. Yeah, the tax cuts were absolutely meaningless, and this was the problem with the rhetoric. It's, there's this mad dash to get all the taxes cut under Liz Truss and things like that. It's like, no, largely there were no tax cuts, effectively no tax cuts. It was just, we are going to scrap the idea of raising taxes, which was the right thing to do. And yet even the Financial Times came out and said Liz Truss is the most right-wing politician the UK has ever seen in the world right now. And all she was basically doing was bringing tax to the standard Boris Johnson era of taxation. It's crazy.
Even my plan to put welfare up by wages, not prices, which I think is fair enough. I don't see why people on working age benefits should be getting more than somebody in a job. Even that caused consternation amongst Conservative MPs.
Again, I just like putting these little clips in of things that I completely agree with. Yes, why should people who are out of work and on benefits get a pay increase rather than the people who are actually in jobs and actually working and be productive? But as she says, even that in the broad church of the Conservative Party, was too right-wing for a lot of MPs. Because the selection process just seems insane. They're so worried about seeming as a Blairite party because that won votes 30 years ago. They feel like they still need to push that. But that's all Sunak's plan was to be more Blairite. And people absolutely hate him. But then the problem is, everyone sees Keir Starmer and says, oh, well, he's definitely the new Blairite. Therefore, we need to be even more Blairite because people love him. When the fact of the matter is that, no, people don't love him. The reason that he's doing well in the polls is because no one is saying they want to vote Conservative anymore. It's not because Labour are any more popular than they were under Gordon Brown or something like that. No, it's just because people hate the Tories at this point. As I do, because they kicked out Liz Truss for without giving her a chance to actually amend little bits of the budget. Literally just making the energy plan means-tested probably would have saved a lot of grace there. Honestly, just ignore the OBR and the IMF. That is what I would do if I was in government, but the Tory party will never understand that.
What was the IMF's criticism? The IMF's criticism wasn't that it was economically bad. Their criticism was it was unfair.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what business is it of theirs,
the tax
whether
cuts.
or not British tax... That's a domestic policy. I can't believe you're equating them, to be honest.
No.
Yeah, I think that is the funniest thing. All of these, as I say, quangos, for those that don't know, a quango is effectively a government body that is supposed to be independent, but obviously never is. And with the international, monetary fund and these international non-government organisations that, comment on domestic economic policy of the countries that are members. Yeah, to say, oh, yeah, this is economically sound, but we don't think it's very fair on the people of Britain. Well, this is why Liz Truss is in such disbelief. Like, why are you saying what is fair and what is not? That's not your job. Your job is to say, is this going to bankrupt the country or not? And as she says, no, it's not. It was actually a good growth plan. I remember this. There was absolutely no organisation that said this will not cause growth. There was no one saying that this is not going to have its stated aims. All they were saying is that, oh look, the markets went a bit doolally. Oh, why is that? Oh, it must be because of Liz Truss. And then obviously you get down into it. Look, I'm not explaining it properly here because it's so complicated it always escapes my mind. Effectively, it was down to LDIs, which is a scheme of liability-driven investments, which are effectively liquid assets that pension schemes and the Bank of England were massively investing in to try and pay off pensions and benefits and things like that. The problem was that the gilt yields were being renewed, and so when it came to government selling their bonds for the part of these investments, obviously the yields go up, which means that less bonds can be sold, which means less borrowing can happen, which in turn made uncertainty in the markets. And then guess what? They stabilised in a week anyway, after absolutely nothing was implemented by Liz Truss. This was, if you think pure announcements can cause this issue, I've got bridges to sell you. There is no way that an announcement can cause, international interest rates to all go up. There's no way this alone causes gilt yields to rise. What effectively happened was Liz Truss was caught in the perfect storm, and as she constantly says in interviews, the Bank of England never actually told her about these liability-driven investment issues because they knew how to deal with it, because they ended up overbuying bonds to try and stabilise the market and then obviously put interest rates up slightly as the rest of the world did because they were having issues as well due to lockdowns, and then everything stabilised after a month. And I'm not being funny, none of that had to do with policy that was not implemented but just announced. Like, you are crazy if you think Liz Truss is to blame because some people's mortgages went up by 200%. And that is only for ridiculously unlucky people who either had to renew their mortgage in about a 2-week window, or people who decided to still get a mortgage in that 2-week window. Which, yeah, I agree, it's bad for them, and I have some sympathy, I suppose, but it's overblown, the issues that Liz Truss caused. I'm not saying she was perfect and did everything right. In fact, Liz Truss admits that she got things wrong, but she did not cause the economic crash. And basically, if you actually listen to the experts, none of them actually agree that she did. But it's just the common narrative going around because basically no one understands economics. And Liz Truss is now being directly asked by Nigel Farage what the Bank of England's role in this whole debacle was. He asks, did the Bank of England know what was in the budget before it was announced?
Yes.
They did.
Of course they did.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I spent the whole summer in the leadership contest talking about all the major measures and saying there would be an urgent fiscal event to announce these measures.
Yes, the mini-budget was of absolutely no surprise to anyone who was paying any attention to Liz Truss's leadership campaign. So there's absolutely no reason for the Bank of England not to know what is going on, even from what was publicly talked about here. But obviously there'd be constant talks with the Bank of England about the economic policy that's going to be announced. That's just obvious.
We had worked up the entire mini-budget with Treasury officials prior to me getting into number 10. So they all knew about it. The Bank of England was cited on it.
Yeah, so the Bank of England basically knew everything that was going to come in, and then Nigel Farage goes into some details about interest rates rising not as much as people thought, and then the Bank of England in advance selling more gilts or government bonds on the international market. And so he's saying, from all this, do you think there was actually the Bank of England were trying to engineer a market failure as you came into number 10?
We know that that is the successful way to approach economic policy, is that fiscal and monetary policy have to work together. And they certainly didn't work to support that, and nor did they alert Kwasi or I to the real risks in the market of the LDI issue.
Yeah, this is a big part of the story that's just been buried and that I've never seen the Bank of England address, that they just did not warn the new cabinet about the LDI issue and issues within the markets. And Liz Truss has constantly said she would have approached the issue differently had she known about these issues. Obviously, she probably would have reduced the benefit, maybe not cut as many taxes as she did, maybe increase corporation tax by 1%, just at the very least to throw out a bit of red meat to the Bank of England, but obviously this didn't happen. And as Liz Truss says, it's for the Bank of England to actually address what happened here, but they've got away with it. Because effectively, as I've said for ages, and we need to tell people they're being gaslighted about this, Parliament doesn't really run Britain. Parliament is the cat's paw of the civil service and of the quangos. They are the ones that are running Britain and putting forward the policy. Parliament's basically there to take public blame as a distraction tactic, and that's it. And this is part of the reason, Keir Starmer wants even more power to be given away from Parliament, so that it can literally just be the public face of the 2 minutes of hate from people when it comes to politics, where things still get worse by actual policy being implemented and run by the civil service and these other quangos. This is obviously what is happening, and it's very difficult to actually tell people that this is what's happening because they simply don't believe you. And why would they? It sounds crazy, but from what I can tell from my years of being a junkie on all this information, that appears to be the case to me. Anyway, as Farage points out, basically no one had heard of LDIs before this issue, and then basically the only people talking about them are Liz Truss supporters. So it's really good that Farage then asks her, what are LDIs and why are they important?
So LDIs are liability-driven investments. Now, I've only found out about this after the market crisis kicked off. And what has happened is, because of pensions regulations in the UK pension funds were trying to find a new vehicle to invest in that would bring higher returns.
So in other words, financially, obviously, the UK is overregulated, and so pension funds have to find very specific ways to actually invest to make more money, to, grow the investment to end up actually being able to pay people's pensions. Because the whole point of a pension fund is that you keep putting money into it so that this pension fund can, accrue interest on your pension, and then obviously you take it out once you retire. That's the point. But the problem is, as Liz Truss says, because it's so overregulated, they have to put them in liability-driven investments, which she explains here.
The problem with these liability-driven investments is they were very susceptible to changes in the interest rates and changes in bond prices. And Britain was very exposed to them. So we had 60% of the world's LDIs were held in the United Kingdom, including by the Bank of England's own pension fund and organisations like BlackRock. And these were worth trillions.
And so thanks to that, pension funds went haywire. Totally haywire, due to the fact that effectively our economy apparently had this whole hidden side of LDIs to it, because the joke I keep saying is that effectively Britain's economy is essentially a housing market with an NHS tumour on the side. And apparently, also, a big part of that economy is actually these LDIs, which, as Liz Truss has explained, they're very susceptible to bond prices because effectively they're all paid for by loans. And so, interest rates dictate effectively the contract of a loan. And so if it's more expensive to borrow money, then obviously it's going to be more expensive to actually get these LDIs bought and sold for. And this is what caused the market to go haywire, because there was uncertainty there. But this is normal in any economy, even communist ones, which is why the free market is supposed to work in such a way that it fills in this uncertainty. You have times of uncertainty, things might go a bit recession-y, and then innovators and entrepreneurs start investing in, new products, new services, new ways for people to effectively spend their money, and then you start getting stability again. This is the boom-bust cycle. And as Liz Truss is saying, effectively we're trying to stay in a bust. We're trying to do the opposite. Stay in a boom, that's what the government's trying to do, without ever having a bust again. And when you get that, you get the 2008 crash. And now we're expecting another crash. And we're always only just staying out of recession. And as explained earlier in the interview as well, all of these, economic advisory boards, the IMF, the OBR, whatever, effectively what they say is keep taxes high, but to lower them, make sure you get in more immigrants. And Liz Truss's whole point was, this isn't growing the economy. I mean, I know news articles came out that, short term we may need more immigrants and all that, but long term I do believe that she was for lowering the overall immigration numbers and definitely cutting low-skilled immigration as well. Because it's something like 80% of people that come over for low-skilled jobs, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So what actually happened after the mini-budget, it really came to light on the Monday morning after the mini-budget, was these pension funds then had to make cash calls. And they could have potentially, become illiquid. That was the issue, and that's what drove the market panic.
Yeah.
So effectively, because the Bank of England and these pension funds couldn't borrow money as easily to invest in these LDIs, they started to become illiquid, as she says. It became hard to actually sell the liability-driven investments because other people couldn't buy them with borrowed money. And if your economy is based on something like this, obviously it's going to crash. This is what happened in 2008. It's just this time it's not private banks due to regulation that they're doing this. No, it's the world banks, it's the central banks, it's the Bank of England and all the public pension funds. You're not going to get a public pension when you're older. I'm just letting you know. The state pension, it's going to be gone. No one's going to have it because obviously it's impossible to sustain. But anyway, Liz Truss then goes on to talk about the aftermath of the mini-budget fiasco.
This is when the governor of the Bank of England intervenes. But he intervenes to create only for a certain period of time, 17 days. So what that effectively does is create a cliff edge, which means rather than sorting out the problem, it's creating speculation about what the government did. And
again, as far as I can tell, this is all true. Whenever I see anyone on Twitter try and say, Liz Truss is crazy, this conspiracy, they never actually give any sort of reference or source as to how what she's saying is a lie. Because as I say, I followed this all quite closely, and this all seems to line up. I mean, obviously there's new things in there that I can't exactly remember off the top of my head if I remember or not. But again, I'm not seeing any claims to the contrary here. I'm not seeing the Bank of England saying that didn't happen. I'm not seeing anyone say, no, they didn't intervene for 17 days. Basically, as far as I can tell, Liz Truss is absolutely telling the truth here in pretty much everything she's saying. And I think she's saying that because she knows her politics career is over anyway. And so what does she have to lose by lying? And what does she have to gain by lying? I think Liz Truss is self-aware that she is never getting back into number 10 again. But I don't think she really cares. I think she's trying to be a bit of a martyr here. And as I say, I kind of respect that, to be honest.
At that time, there was also a lot of briefing coming out of the Bank of England, essentially blaming the mini-budget for what was actually happening in the LDI market. And so not only had we not been alerted to this LDI issue, we were actually being blamed for the consequences. So there was blame shifting going on.
Yeah, again, this is a thing that me and the Wellington Project are constantly pushing because it's true. the mini budget can't have caused the market speculation caused by the LDI issue, caused by the bond market change, caused by gilt yields rising, caused by interest rates rising. It's impossible. It's literally impossible for an announcement to cause that. I mean, honestly, if you pay attention to economic news over the past few years, basically every time there has been an economic disaster, all economists basically say, oh, well, we couldn't have seen this coming, this is impossible. But then you actually listen to, I don't know, the IEA or basically free market think tanks or free market economists, they predict it pretty much every time. So this is why I'm a free marketeer, because free market economists seem to actually be able to understand these issues. And this is what Liz Truss is saying. She would have been able to probably predict this issue or do something about this issue if she was warned of it in advance, but she wasn't. And now it has happened, and now she understands it. She says, right, this is all that is going on. I'm being blamed for it. I actually didn't have much to do with it, because how can a mini-budget possibly crash the UK economy, which didn't even crash, by the way? There was a slight dip for about 2 weeks. And even then, a few months later, news came out that actually the fastest growth happened during Liz Truss's time in Parliament, so how do you square that circle? Anyway, I finally actually addressed in a proper video what happened during Liz Truss's downfall as PM, and I'm glad I have covered it, because yes, it's pretty much all to do with the Bank of England, and not an awful lot to do with Liz Truss, because she didn't have the necessary information to actually fix the issue. So, you know, if you can remember all that, which I always struggle to remember, then please let everyone know that they are being gaslighted and Liz Truss didn't crash the economy, because it's simply not true. Anyway, we are finally getting to the point where Liz Truss says what her hopes are for the future and what her ideal situation would be. So, start on, obviously, she's a Tory MP, so she gets asked about the future of the Conservative Party.
I want to get the Conservative Party to adopt the right policies and the right approach as soon as possible. I want us to do it before the election, so I want us to say...
It's not going to happen.
I mean, Nigel Farage is right. There's no way they're not going to follow the Sunak playbook at this point, because the MPs demand it. And screw what the members think, apparently. I mean, I'm still a Tory member, and I will still stay as a Tory member, because I can see it being incredibly useful down the line when Sunak inevitably gets ousted, and the members are once again asked, who do you want as leader? I'm not going to lie, if Liz Truss puts herself forward and actually gets into like the final two, I'm voting Liz Truss. I don't care who, even against Kemi Badenoch, for no other reason than I think it will be really funny. Because at this point, politics is so governed by people we can do nothing about. You may as well just vote people in that are going to get them to rage and therefore accelerate and make mistakes, and then just let them keep making mistakes until the system gets untenable. I guess that's our best chance, because as I say, nothing can really happen in Parliament. Liz Truss has made that clear. Parliament will just get blamed for the fault of the Bank of England on pension funds. And for a lot of other issues not caused by Parliament, obviously.
And I think one of the big divides in the Conservative Party at the moment is between those of us who think we need serious change to our institutions that have become wokeified, and there are those who want to continue with the status quo. And that is the battle within the Conservative Party. Yeah,
that's all just true. And I think this is why 0 seats isn't necessarily the right way to go, because an awful lot of the Tory members, they are very right-wing. they're free market. They don't want woke stuff about. They want complete change into the institutions. It's the good place to go for it. And last time I went to a Tory meeting, a lot were thinking of joining Reform, and to be honest, they probably have joined Reform now, because it's the same with UKIP. It's just for a bunch of disaffected Tories. But the problem is that because they keep leaving, the Tory party just keeps going more and more left-wing. And I suppose when it just eventually does become one-to-one with Labour, which is not that far away from, let's be honest, you know, what's going to replace it? We don't know. Peter Hitchens never knew, and at this point he doesn't agree that there's any chance of even making an alternative Conservative institution, so maybe that's not the answer in the end. Maybe the answer in the end is actually we need some sort of revolutionary look on politics. Maybe it is the post-liberal way of looking at things. Maybe trying to... Maybe if we do go back, it won't be the right thing to do, because it will inevitably lead us back into the same liberal world order. Maybe we need something different to Thatcherism, but something that equates Thatcherism and how revolutionary it was to affecting the political class, because it really did change things. This is why Margaret Thatcher said when Tony Blair got in that she knows that she has changed Labour from just being basically a trade unionist socialist party. It is now a party that understands the good of the free market, financing and business. But the problem is now is that, well, no, actually, Tony Blair was never about that and has actually reversed it to business is bad, unless it's big business saying that gay people are great. And that's where we've ended up. To a very sanitised version of Britain where you have gay pride flags everywhere, companies showing off they're paying women more than men in the company, and trying to get as many minorities in their adverts as possible. And Margaret Thatcher never wanted that, but it's what Tony Blair gave us, but he was never going to tell us that that was what he was going to give us. And so yes, this is why a lot of Tory members and some of the MPs actually do want, effectively, a political revolution. Because it's too late for a counter-revolution, it's been 30 years. We now need another revolution to overthrow the Blairite institutions that we see everywhere. And I'm happy for Liz Truss to be pushing that in the mainstream. Anyway, a lot of the rest of this talk is not so much about how the West can be saved, it's more how Liz Truss, again, she effectively repeats herself and says, the institutions have all been captured, I tried to fight them, didn't quite work, I need to spread the message and effectively get more of a political foothold to actually, found a revolution, for lack of a better term. And so we're just going to skip to the final thought, because I think it's really funny.
Final thought. If Donald Trump wins on November the 5th in America, can he save the West?
Yes.
Wow.
I think he's an important part of saving the West. And I think that if Joe Biden gets into office again, it will be disastrous.
I'm not being funny here. For a mainstream politician to openly say that on television, I've never seen that before in Britain. I've never seen it at all. It's usually Trump, Trump's a bit bombastic, isn't he? I don't like the way he does things, but he is a bit of an Anglophile. It's this very, I tacitly support him, but don't want to say it out loud. Liz Truss just says, yes, I completely support Donald Trump. I hope he gets in. He can save the West. And I don't know how much I agree with that necessarily. I've not really been following American politics too much recently. But from everything I've seen post Joe Biden getting in, basically American politics has just got boring because nothing seems great. But, even when mainstream shows are making fun of the fentanyl crisis in the US, like it was on Smiling Friends, then I think people are starting to realise that, that Joe Biden hasn't really done anything great for the American people since getting in. So, I guess it'll be funny when Donald Trump gets back in. That's about as far as I'll go with that. But anyway, that's I think that's I cut this down massively. I didn't want this to go on for about 2 hours as it sometimes does. So I think less than 1 hour 10 is pretty good for a video like this. As you can probably tell, Liz Truss is definitely on a martyrdom arc at this point in terms of her politics. If she manages to rise from the ashes and actually become Prime Minister, as I say, if nothing else, it'll be the greatest comeback in political history. And for that alone, I think it'll just be funny enough to actually vote for her. So let's see what happens over the next 5 years, because I think people will get pretty desperate when Keir Starmer is put in power, and it turns out all this talk of being, we'll be fiscally responsible, and like Liz Truss, we'll keep funding the NHS, or we'll deal with the small boats, and it all turns out to just be a laughable lie, then people will get pretty desperate for literally anything new. And Liz Truss is on her route to becoming something quite new, even from her first time in Parliament. So, I think it's going to be an interesting next few years. As I say, we're coming up to the point where the Clown Decade is going to accelerate in how bad things get. Like, you think things are bad now. Look, Warhammer recently allowed female space marines to exist and said, that's always been canon. Like, that was kind of the last British cultural stalwart against open wokeness, and, it's fallen now. So that's only going to spread out from cultural exports and, start going a hell of a lot more mainstream than it was. So, as if it's not already mainstream. Basically, I don't know where we're going to hide, because we're going to have to. But that's just the reality of what's going to happen in the next 5 years. So, good luck to everyone living in Britain, including myself. I think we're going to need it. I wouldn't be shocked if Liz Truss actually ends up on trial at some point for the things she's saying. But well, we'll see how it all goes. Anyway, that is everything I had for you today in terms of shilling. The other side of the hill will be on the Wellington Project tonight. There should be a video letting you know, just to announce that that's going live on this channel, so follow the link in the description there. Regional Variations returns tomorrow, and then on Friday, I have confirmed now, the other no, not the other side of the hill, Laughing at the Guardian will return. We will be having Josh from the Lotus Eaters, we will be having Poe the Person, and of course John from the Wellington Project. So that should be a good few hours stream there. So come along to that and laugh along with us, because I really don't want to cry. Anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.